So it's a lot to unpack. We're looking at the history and the impact, the global impact of Black communities worldwide, really. So,
big topic.
Okay.
We're going to follow the threads, though. We're going to connect the transatlantic slave trade to things like AAVE, African American Vernacular English. We're going to look at migration patterns, the Harlem Renaissance, birth of music genres, global music genres, the Black diaspora as a whole, and its lasting legacy today.
Okay.
So, big picture stuff.
It is.
We'll be keeping it formal today, like an interview.
Makes sense, given the scope, Yeah. A lot of ground to cover.
So let's start with one of the most impactful, I think, periods in history.
I'd agree.
Slavery.
Yeah.
Specifically the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
It really shaped global racial hierarchies in ways we still feel today.
Absolutely. The legacy is undeniable. Your notes highlight dehumanization as a key part of this. Reducing people to commodities. During the slave trade, 2 million Africans died.
It's hard to even fathom that scale of suffering.
I know, during the Middle Passage alone.
It's Middle Passage, yeah.
That's just, how did this dehumanization, how did it work to build these racial hierarchies?
Well, it created a logic, a terrible logic. It allowed people to justify enslavement by saying, these people aren't fully human. It's easier to exploit, to brutalize what you don't see as equal.
And that then fed into this idea of Europeans being superior.
Precisely. A racial hierarchy emerged with Europeans at the top and Africans at the very bottom.
And it wasn't just about like bad morals, right? There's this huge economic engine.
Oh, absolutely. Economics fueled this, reinforced it.
The labor of enslaved Africans built wealth for European power.
Sugar, tobacco, cotton. Those are the engines.
Right. In the Americas, the Caribbean.
Massive profits built on suffering.
And so this economic dependence further entrenched those racial ideologies.
Of course. Money talks, and it spoke volumes about how these societies viewed race.
It created a power imbalance, too, globally.
A huge one. Europe was enriched, while Africa was depleted, both in people and resources.
And that's something that we're still grappling with, these inequalities.
Absolutely. The aftershocks are still felt economically, socially, all over the world.
And it wasn't just like limited to those directly involved in the trade.
Right. That's important to note.
Your research suggests these ideas spread globally.
They did. Through laws, through social norms, through how people talked about race.
So this concept of Black inferiority, it became embedded.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Even in places without direct slave trade involvement. It impacted free people of African descent too, not just those enslaved.
Wow. And that all contributed to this global view of race as a hierarchy.
Yeah. A hierarchy with white superiority at the top, and sadly, that legacy lingers.
That's what's so disturbing, right? That it's not just history.
Exactly. We can draw a direct line from then to now.
Systemic racism.
Yeah.
It persists.
The hierarchies established then, they didn't vanish with abolition.
Right.
They're in our wealth gaps, in our justice system, in how people are treated every day.
It's in the challenges faced by the Black diaspora globally.
Racial profiling, police brutality. Those aren't isolated incidents. They're echoes of the past.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
But we need to understand it to move forward.
I agree. Knowledge is the first step.
Okay. So, shifting gears slightly, let's talk language.
Okay.
AAVE. African American Vernacular English.
Fascinating how it evolved.
It really is. And your notes point out it started during slavery.
Right. You had people from all these different West African cultures forced to communicate
in a language they didn't know.
Exactly. So they blended what they knew, their native tongues, with the English of the enslavers.
And created something new.
It wasn't intentional, of course. It was a necessity. But it laid the groundwork.
AVE as we know it. And then after emancipation,
things get interesting. Segregation, sadly, played a role. By keeping Black communities relatively isolated, AAVE could develop more independently.
Away from mainstream English.
Exactly. It solidified its own grammar, its own pronunciation.
Like the habitual be.
He be working. Right. A constant state of being.
Right. Or the sounds changing.
Truth instead of truth. Those sorts of shifts.
Then there's the Great Migration. Huge movement of people.
Millions of African Americans from the South to the North and West, 1916 to 1970.
That must have impacted AAVE too.
Hugely. It spread those urban variations more widely.
So it became more like a national thing.
In a way, yeah. And new forms popped up too. He be the best, that intensify be.
Oh, right. I've heard that. And she be done had her baby.
The resultative be done. Fascinating, the nuances.
It is. You don't think about it when you're just talking.
Exactly. But linguistically, it's rich.
And then by the mid-20th century, academics start paying attention.
The Ebonics debate happened.
Oh, yeah, I remember learning about that.
It was controversial, for sure.
But it did something important, didn't it?
It did. It helped legitimize AAVE as a dialect.
Not just bad English.
Right. It has its own rules, its own internal consistency.
And research showed regional differences even within AAV.
Between urban and rural speakers.
There's so much complexity, and today, AAV is everywhere.
It's woven into the fabric of American culture, and even globally you see its influence.
Through music, through slang, it's gone mainstream.
Cool. Crib, funky, those all have roots in AAVE. Amazing how language travels.
It is, but it's still, there's a stigma.
Unfortunately, yes. Some see it as improper, unprofessional.
Which leads to code switching.
Right, having to switch between AAVE and standard English, depending on the situation.
So much of Black history is about migration.
It's a defining theme for sure.
Forced migration, like the transatlantic slave trade.
Which we talked about. The largest forced migration in history, really.
13 million Africans, over centuries.
Dispersed across the Americas, the Caribbean, Europe even.
It reshaped demographics in a way that's hard to grasp.
Absolutely. And led to so much suffering, but also to the creation of new societies.
Built on that enslaved labor.
Yeah.
Those systemic inequalities we talked about.
Sadly, yes.
But then there's voluntary migration too. What drove that?
A mix of things. People were looking for better opportunities, more freedom.
So what, they were pushed out of their homelands? By hardship.
By hardship, by political instability, sometimes by ongoing discrimination.
And pulled towards places with more promise.
Places like the U.S. offering jobs, social mobility, at least in theory.
But even then there were challenges, right?
Of course. Adapting to a new culture isn't easy. Language barriers. And racism? It didn't disappear across borders.
And then we have the Great Migration. A huge internal migration within the U.S.
Right. Millions of African Americans moving from the rural South to the urban North and West.
Driven by, what, the same things?
Similar, yeah. Escaping Jim Crow laws, the violence, looking for jobs in the industrial North.
And some were drawn to places like Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance.
Exactly. That period was fueled by migration. It concentrated Black talent, Black voices.
It gave rise to the new Negro identity.
A powerful time full of art and music and a demand for equality.
But even with all that hope, there were struggles, right, in adapting to these new environments.
Absolutely. Whether it's immigrants to a new country or folks moving within the U.S.
They had to overcome so much.
Culture shock, language barriers, systemic racism. It was a constant battle.
But it also fueled incredible resilience, creativity.
It did. You see it in the art, the music, the language, how Black communities adapted and thrived despite the odds.
Let's talk more about the new Negro identity. It seems so crucial to understanding that era.
It really is. It marks a shift in self-perception, in aspirations.
What were the hallmarks of this identity?
Well, first and foremost, racial pride.
A rejection of the imposed inferiority.
Exactly. It was about embracing Black heritage, Black culture.
And unapologetically expressing it.
Yes. Self-expression was key. Through art, through literature, through music.
Telling our own stories.
On their own terms. Not catering to white audiences or expectations.
And there was an intellectual side too, right?
A huge intellectual component. Education was championed.
Like W.E.B. Du Bois and his talented 10th idea.
Exactly. It was about nurturing Black intellectuals, Black leaders.
To challenge the narrative of intellectual inferiority.
Precisely. And to dismantle those harmful stereotypes.
Through their work, through their presence.
It was a conscious effort to show the complexity, the nuance of Black life.
And all of this fueled a growing sense of, what? Self-determination.
Absolutely. This idea that Black people could control their own destiny.
And that led to activism.
It laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement, for sure. Yeah. That demand for equality, for justice.
And it's all happening in this urban environment, the Harlem Renaissance.
Right. That cosmopolitan setting added another layer.
It challenged the image of Black Americans as solely rural agricultural.
Instead, it's this image of sophistication, of urbanity.
Adding to that sense of pride, of collective power.
Exactly.
Okay. Music. Can't talk about Black culture without talking about music.
It's so central, so influential.
Globally influential. So many genres have roots in Black culture.
It's amazing when you trace the lineage.
Jazz, for example,
Yeah.
early 20th century.
Blending blues, ragtime, spirituals, emphasis on improvisation, those complex rhythms.
And it spread everywhere.
Globally, yeah.
Yeah.
Influenced musicians from all backgrounds.
Then there's blues, born from hardship, from resilience.
The soul of Black America poured into music.
And it formed the foundation for so much. Rock and roll.
Even country music to some degree.
Rock and roll, yeah. And it's often the Black pioneers are overlooked.
They are. Chuck Berry, Little Richard. They shaped what rock and roll became.
But they didn't always get the credit.
Sadly not. Face exploitation, appropriation.
And then hip hop, from the Bronx to the world.
A global phenomenon now.
Started as this form of urban expression, almost like protest.
It was a voice for the marginalized.
And now it's mainstream. Dominates the charts.
It's a testament to its power, how it resonates.
Reggae, too, out of Jamaica.
Bob Marley. Bringing messages of resistance, of spirituality.
To a global audience.
Reaching people across cultures.
And soul and R&B.
Gospel roots.
Deeply emotional, powerful vocals.
Influencing pop music. Across genres, across decades.
It's not just entertainment, though.
Right. No, it's never just that. These genres, they're expressions of Black history, of culture, of resilience.
And they've shaped so much more than music.
Fashion, dance, language, even social movement. Think of hip-hop's impact on fashion.
Or protest songs becoming anthems for change.
It's powerful stuff.
But even with all that, Black artists still face barriers.
Systemic barriers, yeah. Lack of representation in leadership roles, ongoing appropriation.
It's a reminder that even with global success, the fight for equality isn't over.
Not by a long shot.
So, the Black diaspora, this huge, complex story of forced migration, of voluntary migration, it's shaped so much of the world.
It really has. Demographically, economically, culturally.
We've touched on the transatlantic slave trade.
The largest forced migration
Ever.
Nearly 13 million people. Reshaping entire continents.
Creating new populations, new societies, but also leaving behind those deep inequalities.
Post-emancipation migration added another layer. People searching for better lives.
Driven by hardship, by hope, both within and outside the U.S.
But facing challenges at every turn. Racism, economic barriers, it's a constant struggle.
It is, but also a story of resilience, of creating vibrant communities despite those obstacles.
And then there's the cultural impact, which is just vast.
It really is.
Music we've talked about.
Jazz, blues, gospel, R&B, hip-hop, reggae.
But also dance, jazz, tap, hip-hop.
African traditional dance influencing styles worldwide.
Visual art, literature, food even.
Think of okra, yams, the origins of coffee, black-eyed peas. The influence is everywhere, even in language, like with AAVE and folklore.
And Nancy stories, Brer Rabbit, passed down through generations.
And fashion, natural hairstyles, clothing styles like the dashiki, it's all interconnected.
And it all speaks to this creativity, this adaptability, this resilience.
The Black diaspora has also been at the forefront of social justice movements.
Absolutely. Pan-Africanism, the civil rights movement, the fight against apartheid.
And today, the fight continues. For equality, for justice.
It's an ongoing struggle.
And there are still so many challenges.
Racial profiling, police brutality, economic disparities. Those are realities for many in the diaspora.
It's a reminder that even with all these contributions, all this progress,
There's still work to be done. Systemic change is needed.
but there is also hope.
There is. Globalization can connect people, strengthen solidarity.
Allow for collective action.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what's needed to create a more just, more equitable world.
So, big picture, big themes.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We looked at slavery, at the transatlantic slave trade,
How it shaped racial hierarchies.
at the evolution of AAVE.
A testament to linguistic creativity, to cultural identity,
We explored migration patterns,
both forced and voluntary, and the challenges and the triumphs of those journeys.
the Harlem Renaissance, the birth of globally influential music genres,
Expressions of Black history, of pain, of joy, of resilience.
the impact of the Black diaspora on the world.
It's undeniable. It's profound. It's ongoing.
And we're left with this question.
Yeah.
What connection stands out most to you between all these facets of Black history and culture?
That's a tough one. What about for you?
For me, it's the resilience. Despite the horrors of slavery, the ongoing racism, Black communities have created such beauty, such strength, and that's something to learn from.
I like that. I think for me, it's the global interconnectedness, how these experiences, these struggles, they transcend borders, and how understanding that interconnectedness can fuel change.
powerful stuff.
It is.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into really complex and important history.
My pleasure. Always a good conversation.
If you found this valuable, please subscribe, like, and comment. It helps us out.
And keeps the conversation going.
Thank you for listening to VSOW.
Until next time.